Chapter 15, Instruments of Expression. Next in order in our list of instruments of channels of mentative expression is the eye, that most wonderful of all the human organs, and which is as much an instrument for the expression of mind power as it is an instrument for receiving the sense impression of sight. Let us consider it in its former aspect. In the first place, the eye is one of the most potent and effective instruments of suggestion, although I have not included it in that class. The expression of the eye will induce mental conditions in others along the lines of suggestions, and those who understand and have mastered this art of using the eyes have all at their disposal a wonderful instrument of suggestive influence. Those of us who have ever met a very magnetic man or a charming and fascinating woman have carried away with us a lively recollection of the expression of the eyes of such a person. Actors and public speakers, as well as those whose business it is to meet and impress people, often make a close study of eye expression in order to produce a heightened effect along those lines. And what kind of an eye has our dynamic individual? Did you ask this question? What would you expect of all the physical avenues of expression of the mental state within? The eye is the most potent and nearest to the soul within. The eyes have well been called the windows of the soul, and they give a clearer idea of the inner man than all else combined. And therefore we may expect our magnetic man to have an eye that reflects the power within him, and we are not disappointed, for even a hasty glance will show that he has what people call an expressive eye. It manifests every mental state at the will of its owner, now stern, now tender, now commanding, now loving, now masterful, now caressing. It is an obedient instrument of the will operating it, and it produces the most wonderful suggestive effect upon those coming under its spell. As an inducer of mental states, the eye has no equal among the physical agents. Even the voice, wonderfully potent though it be, must yield precedence to it. It is more than a physical agent, it is a direct avenue for the passage of mentative currents. Very dynamic people, when aroused by deep interest, emotion or desire, combined with will, seem to have a constant stream of mentative energy flowing from their eyes, which is felt by those within their field of influence. I need not call your attention to the wonderful power of the eye, for you are fully acquainted with it from personal experience. You know how power shows itself in the eyes of the people. In cases where the will has been developed to a very high degree, it is true that the mentative energy can be so concentrated by a very earnest and powerful glance that an actual physical effect may be produced. I have known and heard of cases in which a powerful glance halted people in their tracks. Cases of this kind are told of Napoleon and others, of developed willpower, and rejection is said to have so paralyzed the will of a noted desperado by his glance that he surrendered meekly and accompanied his captor, although fully armed and heretofore deemed absolutely fearless and dangerous. The desperado afterwards said that he could not understand just why he had not killed Jackson where he stood. You have all seen people flinch and quail before the masterful glance of one possessed of a developed willpower. You personally know how this feels. The steady conflict of the eye is familiar to many of us. The boy looks at his mother to see if she is in earnest in her threat. When older, he likewise looks at his schoolmaster to read his purpose. Two men or women look at each other steadily. No word is said, yet the conflict is over soon, and one walks ahead of the other ever after. Oliver Wendell Holmes described an eye battle as follows. The face turned so white with rage that his blue-black moustache and beard looked fearful seen against it. He grinned with wrath and caught at a tumbler, as if he would have thrown its contents at the speaker. The young Marylander fixed his clear, steady eyes upon him and laid his hand on his arm, carelessly almost, but the Jew felt it was held so that he could not move it. It was of no use. The youth was his master in muscle, and in that deadly Indian hug in which men wrestle with their eyes over in 5 seconds, but breaks one of their 2 backs, and is good for 60 years and 10. One trial enough settles the whole matter. The following rules for the cultivation of eye expression were obtained from one of the leading authorities in this line in America. I herewith give them in detail for those who may desire to practice them. Exercise in eye expression. Begin by studying your eyes in the mirror. You will see that in the center of your eyeball there is a black spot. This is called the pupil of the eye. The larger circle surrounding the pupil is called the iris. The white of the eye surrounds the iris. The upper eyelid moving over the eyeball produces a variety of expressions, each giving to the face a totally different appearance or expression of suggestive meaning. All recognize the meaning of these different expressions, but very few of us understand the mechanism producing the impression. Standing before your mirror, study this various expression. The following exercises may help you. 1. Hold the upper eyelid in such a position that its edge rests halfway between the pupil and the top of the iris. This gives an expression of calmness. 2. Rest the edge of the upper eyelid at the top of the pupil. This gives an expression of indifference. 3. The edge of the eyelid resting at the top of the iris gives an expression of strong interest. 4. The edge of the eyelid resting halfway over the pupil gives an expression of deep thought. 5. The edge of the eyelid resting just above the edge of the iris and thus showing a narrow strip of white between the edge of the lid and the edge of the iris gives an expression of emotional activity. 6. The above position, exaggerated so as to show as much of the white as possible between the edge of the iris and the edge of the lid, will give an expression of emotional excitement. Practice the above expression and position. With a little practice, nearly everyone may easily acquire the art of expression in the first 4 exercises, but the last 2 are more difficult of acquirement. The last exercise, emotional excitement, especially, is found to be quite difficult of attainment. Practice these movements until you can reproduce them without the aid of the mirror, just as a man may learn to shave without a mirror by constant practice before one. The exercise will not only enable you to express the different mental states easily and freely, but will also tend to strengthen the muscle and nerves of the eyes themselves, providing that you proceed gradually and do not overtask the eyes at the beginning. Do not scowl or contract the brows in the practices. A few minutes at a time is all that you should use in practicing. When you have mastered the above exercises, especially numbers 5 and 6, you may try the following, which is the most difficult of all. 7. Rest the eyelid in the position of strong interest, i.e. number 3, and then at the same time lift the edge of the lid to the lower edge of the pupil. This position gives the expression of close scrutiny. You will be surprised at the added power of expression that the careful practice of the above exercises will give you. You will be able to manifest more suggestive feeling and will induce emotional states of feeling in others. A little practice will give you such convincing proof of this that you will not need urging to further perfect yourself in them. The expressions of emotional activity and emotional excitement especially will produce a startling result if used on appropriate occasions when you wish to exhibit the appearance of the deepest emotional excitement and force. Development exercises. The following development exercises are highly recommended by the same teacher who has devoted years to study and experiment along these lines. Number 1. Open the eyes quite widely, but not so widely as to strain them. Hold them in that position for a few seconds, gazing into your mirror. which must be directly in front of you on a level with your eyes. While gazing, open them a trifle wider still without straining, and throw an intense expression into them. Do not move the eyebrows, but allow them to remain normal. 2. Resume the above position and then change to the expression of strong interest, looking at yourself in the glass just as you would in looking at another person with that expression. 3. Resume position 1, then gradually change to the expression of emotional activity. See previous exercises, gazing at yourself in the mirror. 4. Resume position 1 and then gradually change to the expression of emotional excitement, gazing at yourself in the mirror. Number 5. Resume position 1 and then gradually change to the expression of close scrutiny, gazing at yourself in the mirror. In the above exercises, you must act as if the reflection of yourself in the mirror were in reality another person whom you wished to influence. The better you act this out, the better will your results be. Number 6. Practice the expression of strong interest on persons to whom you are listening until you feel that you have awakened a response in them. I may add that the expression of deep interest consists of but the same expression heightened by more feeling behind it, and the expression of loving interest is the same, only more so. This more feeling may be either real or assumed, as in the case of the good actor. Number 7. Practice the expression of close scrutiny upon other persons upon appropriate occasions in which you desire to appear as taking a deep, critical interest in some proposition. Many persons have built up a reputation for being good listeners and keen observers by this practice. I mentioned it for what it may be worth to you. I am merely giving you the rules of the game, not necessarily advising you to play it. And now I have reached that part of my subject in which I must speak of the power of the eye to convey mentative force. Owing to some law of nervous mechanism not fully understood as yet, the eye is one of the most effective mediums for the passage of mentative currents from one person to the another. I shall not attempt to indulge in any special theory on the subject, but shall proceed to the description of the facts of the case. I may add, however, that advanced occultists inform us that portions of the human brain during a manifestation of strong emotional effort or exercise of the will resembles an incandescent surface, glowing and phosphorant, and that also there are seen great beams of this incandescent energy streaming out from the eye of the person and reaching the mind of other persons. And more than this, these beams of energy transmit mental states, thoughts, etc. of the person, just as scientists have found that beams of light will carry waves of electricity and have thus been able to send telegraphic and even telephonic messages over such beams of light. One who has mastered the fascination of the eye is able to convey most readily to others the mentative currents which tend to produce similar mental states by mentative induction, as explained elsewhere in this book. If you will but remember the above illustration of the beam of light along which the electric and magnetic current travel, and will form a mental picture of these mentative beams from the eye, you will understand the process much better, and you will at the same time tend to give to your own mentative beams a substantial reality along the lines of visualization. That is, when you wish to use these mentative beams, you should imagine them as actually existing in full force and reality. This will have a tendency to give them a material reality and thus render them a highly efficient medium for the passage of your mentative currents. And now, right there is the best place to instruct you in the proper use of the eye in what has been called the magnetic gaze, but which would be more properly styled the dynamic gaze. There has been much nonsense written on this subject, and in some of my own earlier writings I gave directions along these lines, which I am now able to replace with more approved methods and later discoveries coming from the study and experimentation of myself and others along these lines. I'm willing to improve upon my own method as well as upon those of others. I have no false pride upon this subject, and if tomorrow I find that I can improve upon my work of today, I shall do so and give my students the benefit of the change, instead of stubbornly sticking to it just because I had once stated a theory, fact, or result. There is no standing still in scientific work. He who stands still really goes backward. The former instructions regarding the magnetic gaze told the student to concentrate his gaze at the root of his nose of the other person, that is, right between his two eyes. Now this was all very well, but there is a far better plan. This focusing the gaze between the eye of the other person really results in crossing your gaze and thus robbing it of a portion of the direct electromagnetic power that it possesses. You may prove this by holding up a pencil before your eyes and focusing your eyes upon it. As you draw it nearer and nearer to your eyes, the nearer you get to the pencil or to the other person, the more will your gaze be crossed and the effect impaired. A gaze from a pair of crossed eyes is not nearly so dynamic as one from a pair of straight eyes, giving out a direct, forceful impression. The new dynamic gaze is performed as follows. You do not focus your gaze at a point between the two eyes of the other person, but instead you gaze directly and straightly into his two eyes with your two eyes. The new dynamic gaze is performed as follows. You do not focus your gaze at a point between the two eyes of the other person, but instead you gaze directly into his two eyes with your own two eyes. You will find this difficult and tiring if you perform it in the ordinary way, and herein lies the secret. Instead of focusing your eyes upon his as if you really wished to see the color of his beautiful eyes, you must so focus your eyes that you are really gazing through him as if he were transparent and you wished to see something beyond him. A little practice before a mirror will show you what I mean better than I can explain it to you in words. Practice at gazing through objects will aid you in acquiring this gaze. Try, for instance, focusing your eyes upon the wall opposite you as you raise your eyes. Then as you look at the wall, slowly pass your hand before your eyes at a distance of about 2 feet. But don't change your focus. Don't see the hand plainly, but keep your gaze focused on the wall as if you could see it through the hand. This gaze must not consist of a blank, vacant, stupid stare, but must be intense and earnest. Practice on objects as above stated with your mirror will aid you in perfecting the gaze. It will help you if you have some friends with whom you can practice with. The other person will not be aware that you are not seeing him and are gazing through him. To him it will appear that you are giving him a very deep, intense, steady, earnest glance. He will see your pupils dilate, as they always do when looking at a distant object, and your expression will be one of calm, serene power. And another important point about this gaze is that you may maintain it a long time without tiring the eyes, and without the eyes watering or blinking. You may outstare another person or animal in this way without fatigue, while the other's eyes grow tired and weak. So much of this is true that the results of my own investigation of the subject have convinced me that the animals who manifest fascination really focus their eyes beyond the object in just this way. If ever you get a chance to observe an animal fascinating another, you will see that I am right in this theory. This gazing through the other person is accomplished by a certain accommodation of the eye, as occultists and opticians call it. And while you are performing it, you cannot examine distinctly or see distinctly the eyes of the other person, because your focus is different. To show you why you are able to maintain this gaze such a long time without tiring your eyes, I would remind you of the ease with which you may maintain the expression of being wrapped in thought, daydreaming, lost in a brown study, just thinking about things, etc., with which you are all familiar with. In such a mental state, you are able to gaze into space for a long time without the slightest fatigue, while a few seconds focusing your eyes upon a nearby object will tire them very much indeed. In such a mental state, you are able to gaze into space for a very long time without the slightest fatigue, while a few seconds focusing your eyes upon a nearby object will tire them very much indeed. And then again, you know how long you are able to gaze at an object far out at sea, or far across the desert, or far down or across the mountain, without tiring your eyes. The whole secret is that short-range focusing upon an object tires the eyes much more than does long-range gazing into space. This being the case, it will tire you far less seeing through a person than gazing at him and seeing him at short range. In practicing the maintaining of the gaze for a long time, I would advise against tiring the eyes by gazing at short-range objects. Better practice at gazing at distant objects until you are able to maintain the gaze a long time, as you will be able to do after a little practice. In fact, I advise you to practice the gazing into space, because proficiency in that will enable you to perfect the dynamic gaze. After you have practiced this gazing through method a bit, you will be able to look at an object a couple of feet away and gaze right through it. That is, you will not consciously see it objectively, although apparently staring hard at it. Avoid all exercises tiring to the eyes and proceed slowly, working from trifling successes to more important ones. You will be surprised how a little intelligent practice along these lines will give you a penetrating glance, firm, earnest, and full of magnetism and fascination, without the slightest sense of strain, fatigue, or effort. You have long wished for such an expression. Well, here it is for you. Chapter 16. Using the mentative instruments. In the use of the eyes for the purpose of conveying mentative currents, you should remember that the feeling is the real power behind these currents of power, and that the brain is the dynamo from which the currents originate. The brain, you know, is the great transformer or converter of the mentative energy, and acts just as does a dynamo in the direction of sending forth great waves of power. Consequently, if you wish to send out mentative currents for the purpose of inducing feelings in others, you must first have feeling generated in your mental dynamo. It will be well for two people to practice the I exercise together, but in the absence of a friend in whom you have confidence, you may obtain excellent results by practicing before your friendly mirror. In either case, you must first arouse in your mind the feeling that you wish to express in mentative currents. Put your feelings into your glands and it will be felt. Exercise 1. Look into the eyes of your friend or your own mirror and then say mentally, I am stronger than you. Throw into your glands as much of the feeling of strength as you can. Exercise 2. Say mentally, I'm more positive than you. I am outgazing you. Throwing as much positivity as possible into your gaze, the same being inspired, of course, by your feeling. Exercise 3. Say and feel, you are afraid of me. I'm making you feel my strength. Throwing the feeling into your gaze. After you have acquired the faculty of making your strength felt by above exercises, you may use the same upon other people when the occasion renders it advisable. If you are addressed by some person whom you think is trying to master you mentatively, or whose strong influence you wish to ward off, you may use the above method on him. As a rule, the person who is doing the talking has a slight advantage over the listener, all else being equal. The speaker is the more positive because he is expressing more power. But you may counteract this if you are a listener by simply sending him a glance, accompanied by the feeling of, I scatter your force into the wind. You cannot affect me. In resisting an attack of this sort, keep your mouth closed with the jaws tight, for this bite denotes strength and firmness, and bring into play the part of the brain manifesting these qualities, and thus charges your mentative currents with these feelings. At the same time, gaze firmly and steadily into the eyes of the other, using the dynamic gaze. Avoid the sitting position when the other person is standing. Do not give him this advantage, but take it yourself if you can. In speaking to the persons and requesting them to do something, you should accompany the verbal request by a mental command. For instance, if you say, you will do this for me, won't you? You should accompany the question with the command, made mentally, with a proper glance, you shall do this for me. If you are the person requested to do something that you do not wish to do, you should answer, no, I do not care to do this, or I do not see my way clear to do it, or I am unable to oblige you, etc. But at the same time, you must send the mental answer with its accompanying glance, I will not do it, and you cannot make me. A well-known teacher along these lines several years ago taught his pupils to gaze into the eyes of persons whom they wish to affect, at the same time saying mentally, I am looking at you, I'm looking through your eyes into your brain, my willpower is stronger than yours, you are under my command, I will compel you to do what I wish, you must do what I say, you shall do this. Do it at once. It will readily be seen that this will generate a powerful meditative current if there is a sufficiently strong feeling, will and desire behind it. But right here I shall give you an antidote for this kind of influence. In all cases where you are attacked mentally in this way, you may dissolve the force by a positive denial. The positive denial is the powerful force that scatters into tiny bits the force directed against one. It is a destructive agent, just as is the positive statement a constructive or creative one. One who understands the scientific use of this destructive force may undo the mentative work of others to a surprising degree. By a strong positive denial, you may scatter and disintegrate any mentative influence directed against you. This formula will give you a general idea of it. Suppose that you are repelling a statement such as given above. In that case, you should say mentally, accompanying it with a proper glance, with the feeling back of it, I deny positively your power over me. I deny it out of existence. I will not do your bidding, and I deny your right and power to command me. I deny your power and I affirm my own. You may cultivate this power to use the positive denial by practicing on an imaginary person whom you may suppose is trying to influence you. Imagine the strong, positive person before you trying to influence you, and then start to practice the positive denial on him until you feel that you have beaten him off and have sent him flying away in retreat. These imaginary mental battles will develop a great power of mentative resistance in you, and I advise you strengthen yourself along these lines. If you feel that you are weak, you may improve on above exercises by imagining that after your enemy is in full retreat, you follow him up and pour statement after statement into him, changing your position from a defender into an attacking force. This imaginary rehearsals will do more for one than people think possible. They are like stage rehearsals that make perfect the actors. They are the fencing lessons for which the swordsman gains skill and strength. Practice, practice, practice makes perfect in everything, in meditative work as well as physical. There are good psychological and occult reasons behind this method and practice, but I shall not enter upon the field at present. This book is intended to give you the how of the subject rather than the why. In personal conversation with another, you will find it of greatest value to see as clearly as possible a mental picture, chart or map of what you are saying to him. By so doing, you will impress most forcibly upon his mind that which you wish him to see and feel. In this statement is compressed the secret of effective speaking. In the degree that you see and feel the thought that you are expressing in words will be the degree of impression made upon and mentative induction produced in the other person. The secret, of course, lies in the power of visualization. You may find an evidence of your increasing mentative influence by trying the psychological experiment of willing people to move this way or that way by gazing intently at them. In this experiment, it is not necessary for you to gaze into their eyes. Gazing at their back, preferably at the upper part of the neck, at the base of the brain, will be okay. You may try willing persons to look around on the street or in public places, etc., or you may will that they turn to the right or left of you. When approaching each other on the street or in stores, you may will that a certain clerk from out of a number of clerks will step forward to wait upon you. These and many similar experiments have an interest to the majority of students and are accomplished with comparative ease after sufficient practice. The whole theory and practice consists of a steady gaze and a mental command and will that the person will act so and so, together with earnest expectation that he will obey the command and the mental picture of his doing so. That is all there is to it. In the use of the eye as a mentative instrument, remember first, last, and all the time that desire and will are the phases of the mentative energy, and that in the degree that desires kindle and will is exerted, so will be the power expressed by yourself and impressed upon others. Read this book over a number of times until you have fully grasped the underlying principles. Then commit its exercises and instructions to memory. Then practice frequently and perfect yourself in the methods pointed out until you render them second nature. You will be conscious of the gradual growth and development along the lines of mentative power and influence. The flame of dynamic mentation once lighted, it will never die out. Tend the flame carefully, keep the wick trim clean, and fill the lamp with oil, and it will ever burn bright and emit heat and light and power. The last meditative instrument mentioned in the previous chapter is touch. There was a time in my early stages of experimentation in psychological research when I laughed at the idea of the touch playing any real part in the work of mental influence. Of course, I saw the effect of the touch in certain phases of the psychological work, but I believed that it was all merely suggestion. But I soon learned that the touch was really a most potent instrument of mentative energy. I now explained it by the idea of the nerves being like the wires upon which the electric current travels. The brain is the dynamo or converter of the energy, and while the latter travels in waves and currents without any wires, just as do the waves of the wireless telegraph, still, if there is a wire to be had, then it follows the lines of least resistance and takes advantage of the nerve wires. Certain parts of the body have nerve cells very highly developed in them, are in fact miniature brains. In the case of some persons of sensitive and trained touch, there exist little clusters of nerve cells at the ends of the fingers that act like miniature brains. The lips are also highly developed in this respect, as well-known phenomena of kissing evidence. The fingers and hands are excellent polar mediums for conveying the mentative energy that pours down over the nerves from the brain and through which it passes to the other person. The use of the touch of the hands as a channel for conveying mentative energy depends greatly upon the development of the hands by the individual. Those who understand this matter develop the conductivity of the hands by treating them as follows. Think of your hands as excellent conductors of mentative energy, and imagine that you can feel the energy pouring down the nerves of your arms and out of your hands, obeying your will when you shake hands with people. You will soon develop your hands to such a degree that some sensitive persons will actually feel the current passing into them. Always accompany the passage of the current with the thought or feeling that you wish to induce in the other person, just as you do when you use the dynamic gaze. In fact, the gaze and the hand clasp should be used together when possible, for by so doing you double the effect. When you shake hands with a person, throw mind and feeling into it and do not fall into the mechanical, lifeless method so common among people. Throw your feeling down to your hand and at the same time make a mental command or statement appropriate to the case. For instance, grasp the person's hand with feeling and interest, saying mentally at the same time, "You like me." Then, when you draw your hand away, if possible, let your fingers slide over the palm of his hands in a caressing manner, allowing his first finger to pass between your thumb and your forefinger, close up in a crouch of the thumb. Practice this well until you can perform it without thinking. That is, make it your natural way of shaking hands. You will find that this method of shaking hands will open up a new interest in people towards you, and in other ways you will discover its advantage. You never know a fascinating person who did not have a good hand clasp. It is a part of the fascinating personality. There are many persons well grounded on the psychological principles underlying the subject who use the hands as a medium for mentative energy. Without shaking hands, for instance, they sit near the other person and place their hands so that their fingers will point towards him, at the same time willing that the current flows through the fingers and towards the other. They also use their hands in conversation as to have the tips of their fingers pointing towards the other. The last plan becomes highly effective when used with appropriate gestures, for it is akin to the mesmeric pass of the hands. In this connection, I would say beware of the person who is always trying to put his hands on you. Beware of the pawing over process. Avoid it in the ordinary way, if possible, or else deliberately practice the positive denial toward the person, holding the idea and mental statement that I deny the power of your magnetism, I scatter it by my denial. In concluding this chapter, I would especially caution young women, and older ones for that matter, against allowing men to be familiar with them in the direction of holding hands or similar practices. Not only does this familiarity breed contempt, but there are good psychological reasons why the practice is to be condemned. You have seen what part the hands play in magnetizing, as it is called, and is it not clearly discernible how one may use the hands in this petting and all that sort of thing in order to psychologically affect another person? I'm not speaking now of caresses indulged in by honorable true lovers, for all the talk in the world would not change that sort of thing. But I am alluding to the indiscriminate pawing over on the part of strange men that some young girls allow. There is a danger in this sort of thing, and I want you to know it. If you have daughters or young female relatives, warn them against this thing and tell them the reason why. And the same thing is true of the man who is always patting other men on the shoulder or resting his arms around them, or else taking hold of them in a friendly, caressing way during a conversation. Such men may not know the psychology of the thing, but they have found out that this sort of patting up makes other men more impressible and amenable to their influence, and so they practice it. Make them stop it, either by moving away or by positive denial. Now, once more, remember the power of this positive denial as a disperser and disintegrator of adverse influence. If this book taught you nothing else, it would still be worthwhile to you because of this one point of instruction. For this positive denial is a mentative armor that will protect you, a mentative sword that will defend you, a mentative lightning flash that will clear the mental atmosphere. Learn the secret of positive statement and positive denial, and you are clad in an invulnerable armor and are armed with a weapon of power. And so you may, like the warrior bold, go gaily to the fray. But, after all, the secret of influence in our dynamic individual lies in his mental states. The outer forms are but reflections of the inner. If you will cultivate the connection between your mind and the great universal will, the universal mind power, then your will becomes so strong that the outward expressions will come of themselves. But in mounting the first steps of attainment, it becomes important for the student to pay attention to the outward characteristics, because by so doing he makes a clearer mental path for the acquisition of the desired mental states. By the very laws of mental suggestion, he is able to imitate these outward expressions and thus induce in himself the mental states, which in time becomes habitual. I do not mean that one should allow the suggestion of the other's appearances to move him in this way. This is not the idea. What I mean is that one may be autosuggestion, so reproduce the outward characteristics associated with a desired mental state or quality, and by acting them out actually materialize into reality the mental state themselves. Remember the rule: mental states take form in action, and action reproduces their associated mental states. It is a rule that works both ways. The voice makes the phonographic record, and the latter reproduces the sound. Remember this illustration, for it will help you to get the right conception of the psychological law underlying the phenomenon. There is a certain point to which I would direct your attention to at this stage. I refer to the well-known psychological fact that mental states express themselves in physical action. Every mental state has its associated physical action, and these actions, when perceived by another person, are apt to induce similar mental states in that person, along the lines of mental suggestion. But there is another law, less understood by the public, and that is that the manifestation of physical action tends to induce in the mind of the person performing it the mental states generally associated with the production of the action. Let us take a common example to illustrate the operation of these two related laws. Let us suppose that you are holding a mental state of anger, fright, combativeness, etc. In that case, you will find that your brows will frown, your jaws will be fixed in a savage bite and slightly protruded, and your hands will be clenched. The mental state has taken form in physical action. Very well, you all recognize this fact. But there is the law reversed. If you will, frown deeply, clench your fists savagely, fix your jaw in a fighting trim, etc., and will maintain that physical attitude for 5 minutes, at the same time allowing it to manifest in your walk, etc., as it surely will, without interference, you will find yourself growing into a mental state of annoyance, combativeness, etc. And if you keep it up long enough, you will be mad in earnest. So true is this that if you carry the thing far enough and run into someone else, you will be very apt to get into a row with them. And still more remarkable is the fact that the person that you run into will be very apt to take up the mental suggestions of your manner and will also feel fighty. It would not take much to stir up trouble between the two of you. And, still more remarkable, if you continue this physical attitude until it produces the mental state, you will find that you are inducing similar mental states in those around you by the agency of mentative currents. So you see the close connection between physical action, mental states, suggestion, and telementation. They act and react upon each other. What has been said of the mental state of anger applies equally to any intense feeling or mental state. Like begets like, along all the lines mentioned. Now, all this means that the man who is possessed of a strong mental state will manifest unconsciously the physical actions which will affect others, along the lines of mental suggestion. He will not have to study the question of what suggestions to use, providing he feels sufficiently strong to automatically manifest the action. But when a man does not feel sufficiently strong to manifest the suggestive actions, he may produce the same effect by acting the part, without being actually involved in it, by first reproducing the physical action, which will thus induce a sufficiently strong mental state to manifest itself both along the lines of suggestion and also along the line of personal magnetism. Every good actor induces feelings in you in this way, along both these lines, and you may do the same if you want. Many dynamic people are doing it every day. On this subject, so far as I have gone, I've given you a most important secret of psychological influence in a plain, practical way, so simple in fact that there is a risk of many of you entirely overlooking its importance. Better go back over this part of the lessons again many times until you are able to catch its inner meaning and are able to read between its lines. It's quite worthwhile, I assure you. Of course, some of my kind critics will take me to task for teaching this acting out idea. They will call it inculcating principles of deceit, etc., etc., and will then go on their way admiring magnetic personalities and regretting the absence of tact in other persons who have rubbed them the wrong way. I have noticed that these hypercritical people are generally hypocritical as well. I have known many good men who were not dynamic, and the world turned them down and often jumped all over them. And I have known quite a number, not quite so good, who possessed quite a goodly degree of dynamic force, and the world received them with open arms and showered its praises and rewards upon them. But this does not mean that one cannot be good and dynamic at the same time. There are plenty of good men who are highly dynamic, and there are plenty of bad men equally so. And there are plenty of both good and bad who lack dynamic force. But note this fact, please, that the good men and the bad men who are highly dynamic generally manage to get there along their own line of life. And both the good and the bad who lack dynamic force are generally stranded along the wayside. Dynamic force is neither good nor bad. It is a natural force and is used by all. In this respect, it is like any other natural force. And then again, this book is not for the purpose of teaching the bad use of dynamic force, rather than the good. It states the principles and the law as they are. It is true that the bad man may take advantage of the law and use it for bad purposes, but so may the good man take advantage of it and make himself a greater power for good. Dynamic force is just as effective in the preacher as it is in the confidence man, and just as effective in the salesman and businessman. Everyday person as it is in either the preacher or the confidence man. It is a natural quality and has nothing to do with good or bad, any more than has elocution or rhetorical ability or personal appearance. If the good folk prefer to leave this important subject for the bad folk, that is their own concern, not mine. Personally, I feel like the old preacher who was remonstrated with by some hidebound old parishioner regarding certain musical innovation that had been introduced into the church service. The old preacher looked kindly at the old veteran conservative of the flock and said, "Well, brother, it may strike you in a different way, but to me it seems wrong to allow the devil to monopolize all the good music. I believe in giving the Lord his share of it." And I say amen to that. If dynamic meditation was as much used to further the interests of the right as it is been to further the interests of the wrong, the old world would get down to a little easier motion. If the preacher would make his talks as dynamic as the actor does his play, and the lawyer does his appeals to the jury, there would surely be something doing in church work, and the prevailing emptiness of the pews would be cured. If goodness was made as attractive as badness, the devil would be placed on the retirement list. Chapter 17, Mental Suggestion. Before beginning our consideration of the subject of mental suggestion, let me call your attention to the following general statements regarding mentative induction, in which general subject is included. The subdivisions called personal magnetism, mental suggestion, and telementative induction, respectively. 1. Mental states may be caused by mentative induction. 2. Such induced mental states may be caused by the mentative currents of personal magnetism or by the mentative currents of telementation or by mental suggestion. 3. Mentative currents are waves or streams of vibrant mind power emanating from the minds of people and carrying with them the vibrations of mental states. The vibrations tending to induce similar mental states in the minds of people within the field of induction. A. There are two poles of mind power: the emotive pole, manifesting desire, feeling, emotion, and the motive pole, manifesting will, etc. The acting force affecting other minds manifested by those two poles being called desire force and willpower, respectively. B. Desire force tends to awaken similar vibrations in the minds of others, thus producing similar desires, or it charms the wills of others and causes them to carry out its desires, its action and nature bearing a strong resemblance to feminine mental power. C. Willpower tends to awaken desire in the minds of others by sheer mastery and forcefulness. It also acts in the direction of combating and overpowering the wills of others and taking them captive. It also directs, masters, concentrates, or restrains one's own desire force on occasions. Its action bears a strong resemblance to masculine mental power. D. When the mentative currents are emanated and the mentative induction is manifested, when the projector and the recipients are in the personal presence of each other, we use the term personal magnetism. When the same manifestation occurs when the projector and the recipients are not in the personal presence of each other, then we use the term telementative induction. But the principle employed is the same in each case, induction through telementation being the operative principle. In personal magnetism, however, mental suggestion usually assists in the induction of mental states. For this reason, mental suggestion should be studied in connection with personal magnetism, being supplementary thereto. 4. Mental suggestion induces mental states by reproducing the original mental states of others or one's own previously experienced mental states, including the experience of the race ancestors inherited and recorded in the subconscious minds of their descendants. Suggestion operates along the lines of consent, imitation, association, and repetition, always acting through physical agents for inducing mental states. In personal magnetism, the mentator pours out his mentative currents generated by his will or desire, or both, either in a general way or in a concentrated, directed manner in a personal interview, and thus influences the mind of others by induction. This is usually or always accompanied by mental suggestion using physical agents such as the voice, eye, manner, etc., which heightens the effect produced. And now, with the understanding of the above stated general principles, let us proceed to a consideration of the subject of mental suggestion. Every student of psychology and mental science has heard and read much of that phase of mental phenomena called mental suggestion. Much has been written and taught about it, and the term has been claimed by some teachers to cover all phases of mental influence. I do not entirely agree with these extreme advocates of suggestion, however, for I find much in the subject that calls for a further explanation. But nevertheless, I feel certain that mental suggestion plays a most important part in almost every instance of this class of phenomena and must be seriously considered by all careful students of the subject. Combined with mentative induction by means of mentative currents, it accounts for nearly every phase of the phenomena of mental influence. Therefore, I shall devote several chapters to the consideration of its underlying principles, laws, and methods of application. I feel that no one can be a successful practitioner of telemeditative influence or personal magnetism who is not a good suggestionist, because the very knack of projecting strong suggestions is necessary for the forceful projection of mentative energy and mental currents. While all who have examined the subject are aware of the force and the effects of mental suggestion, few have found it possible to correctly define or describe the term, or to explain it to others. But I feel assured that my theory of mentative induction and the two poles of mind power will enable you to form a very clear and comprehensive knowledge of the underlying laws of the subject, so that, understanding it, you will be able to apply its method of application to the best advantage. Mental suggestion is the term used to designate the process of inducing or exciting mental states or ideas by means of the imagination, by the agency of words of action, outward appearances, or other physical symbols. I divide the phenomena of mental suggestion into two general classes: 1. Active suggestion, and 2. Passive suggestion, as follows. By active suggestion, I mean that the induction or excitement of the mental state or ideas in others by means of positive command, affirmation, statement, etc., bearing directly upon the desired mental state. By passive suggestion, I mean the induction or excitement of mental state or ideas by the subtle insinuation, introduction, or insertion of ideas into the minds of others, which insinuated ideas act in the direction of inducing the desired mental state. Active suggestion is associated with the use of the motive pole of the mind of the suggester, and passive suggestion is associated with the emotive pole of the suggester. One is masculine method and the other the feminine. And here is a good place in which to direct your attention to a very important fact concerning the operation of suggestion in inducing mental states. I allude to the fact that suggestion operates along the line of emotional mentality, feeling, or imagination, and has nothing to do with judgment, reason, argument, proof, etc. It belongs clearly to the feeling side of the mind rather than to the thinking side. One's reason may be appealed to by clever reasoning, argument, logic, proof, etc., and an effect gained. But this belongs to an entirely different phase of mental action. The induction of mental states in others by means of suggestions has to do entirely with the feeling or imaginative phase of the mind. It deals with the production of emotional mentality rather than with rational mentality. This is a most important point, and one that should be thoroughly understood by all students of the subject. It is true that suggestions may accompany an appeal to the reason or judgment of the person influenced, and indeed is generally so used, but strictly speaking it constitutes an appeal to a part of the mind entirely removed from reasoning and judgment. It is emotional and imaginative, first, last, and all the time. And it operates along the same lines as the mental induction produced by mentative currents, as we shall see. And now, with this preliminary understanding, let us pass on to the consideration of the meaning of the terms used. There is nothing like a clear understanding of the terms employed in treating of a subject. If one understands the exact meaning of the terms, he has progressed very far to an exact understanding of the subject itself, for the terms are the crystallized idea involved in the subject. To understand the full and complete meaning of the terms of any subject, it is to know the whole subject thoroughly, for no one can understand a term thoroughly until he knows it in all of its relations, all that pertains to it. Let us start with the word suggestion, as used by the writers of mental suggestion. Some authorities give the broad general definition of anything that is impressed upon the mind through the senses, but this I consider entirely too sweeping, for this definition would make the term cover knowledge of all sort, no matter to what part of the mind it appeals, for all knowledge of the outward world is obtained through the senses. Other authorities define the term as anything insinuated into the mind subtly, cautiously, or indirectly. This definition, fitting nearly the one favored by the dictionaries in defining the word suggestion in its general sense, which is as follows: a hint, a guarded mention, an intimation, something presented to the mind directly, an insinuation, etc. But this last definition of mental suggestion does not fit all the phases of the subject. It fits admirably into the phase known as passive suggestion, which operates by direct, forceful command, statement, etc. And so I must give my own definition of the term to fit my conception of and understanding of its meaning. I therefore here define my use of the term a mental suggestion as follows: a physical agency tending to induce or excite mental states or ideas through the imagination. This is a broad definition which I think will cover all the observable phenomena of mental suggestion. I use the word physical to distinguish suggestive agents from the mental agents, inducing mental states by the operation of mentative currents, telementation, etc. Of course, this distinction will not please those who would claim all mental action as a form of the physical or vice versa. But as I have to draw the line somewhere, I prefer to draw it between the physical agent and the mental, and I think that the majority of my readers will approve of this position. The word agent means, of course, an acting power or cause, etc. The word inducing, as I have used it, has been defined in the previous lesson. The word excite means to call into activity in any way, to rouse to feeling, to kindle to strong emotion. The imagination is that phase of mind which creates mental images or objects or sensation previously experienced. In my use of the term physical in the above definition, I include all words spoken, written, or printed, mannerism and physical action of all kinds, physical characteristics and appearances, etc., etc. All of these physical manifestations act as agents inducing mental states under favorable circumstances. By mental states, I mean states of feeling or emotion. By ideas, I mean images of objects conceived of by the mind. It may be urged that the use of words spoken, written, or printed may be employed and are employed in every appeal to the mind of another, whether the appeal be along the lines of suggestion or argument, reason, etc. Certainly. And in that sense, they act as suggestions. Arguments appeal to judgment and reason, but not to feeling, emotion, or imagination, which are, on the contrary, excited or induced by suggestions or other forms of emotional induction. One may present an idea to the mind of another in a bold, forcible, logical manner, accompanied by argument or proof. But this is an appeal to reason and judgment, not to feeling or emotion, which belong to an entirely different field of the mind. Then again, many personal appeals which are apparently made to reason are really made to the emotional side. One may subtly insinuate into an argument or conversation an appeal to the feelings or emotion of the hearer, in the shape of an idea in the nature of a hint or indeed mention. Such idea will be felt by the listener, who will accept it into his mind, and before long he will regard it as one of his own thoughts. He will make it his own. He will think that he thought it, whereas really he simply feels it and the feeling is induced. This is a case of suggestion. In ordinary social intercourse, you will find that women are adept in this subtle form of insinuative suggestion as compared to men. Men will blurt out statements and ideas in an attempt to prove them, but the woman will gently insinuate the idea into the mind of the other person, so that without having proven a fact, she will have managed to create a definite idea of feeling in the mind of the other by suggestion. I think I need not give examples of this fact. It is apparent to all who have mingled with people. And really, this suggestion resembles the mental suggestion of the psychologists very much. It is true that the practitioner of mental suggestion in his treatments often makes use of the direct, forceful statements such as, "You are strong, cheerful, well, happy." But you will notice even here that he does not argue the point or attempt to prove his statements. He simply affirms and asserts the fact, and by constantly repeated suggestion he finally causes the mind of the other person to accept the statement. So you see, a suggestion may be either a subtle insinuation or a bold, positive statement, but it is never an argument or process of proof. The word impression is good as applied to the effect of the suggestion, but I prefer to stick to my terms, and therefore I shall consider that the effect of the mental suggestion is caused by induction. What, you may say? I thought that the induction was a term used when a mental state was set up in one by mentative currents from the mind of another. Yes, this is true, but my last statement is true also. An induced mental state is one set up by outside influence of some kind, whether that outside influence be a mentative current or by suggestion through a word, a look, a slight, a sight, or anything else. The word induce, means to lead, to influence, prevail on, to effect, to cause. And any mental state that is induced by an outside influence comes clearly under the term. Any physical agent that tends to induce a feeling in the mind of another may be called a suggestion. Even the well-known instance mentioned in the textbooks on psychology comes under this rule. In that instance, it is related that a soldier was carrying some bundles and a pail to his barracks when some practical joker yelled to him in an authoritative voice, "Attention!" Following the suggestion, which induced in him the feeling preceding certain habitual action, he dropped his pail and bundles with a crash and stood at attention, with eyes front, chin out, protruding breasts, stomach drawn in, and hands at his side with little fingers touching the seams of his trousers. That was a suggestion. Do you see the point? The lives of all of us have been molded largely by induction through suggestion. We accepted this suggestion or that one, and it changed the whole current of our lives. Certain things induce certain feelings, called into activity certain mental states, and action followed close upon the heels of feeling. There are varying degrees of suggestive power, just as there are varying degrees of what is called the suggestibility of persons, that is, the tendency to accept suggestion. There are people who scarcely ever act from motives originating within themselves, but whose entire lives are lived out in obedience to the suggested ideas and feelings of others. The development of the willpower regulates the degree of suggestibility. A man of a strong will is not easily affected by suggestion, as is one whose will is weak, who accept without resistance the suggestions coming from all sides. But note the apparent paradox. Persons of weak will may have their wills so developed and strengthened by scientific suggestive treatment that they may become veritable giants of will. A careful student may feel inclined to ask me at this point why I speak of suggested ideas when I have said that suggestion has to do with mental states of feeling and emotion. Are not ideas, he asks, something connected with thought rather than with feeling? The question is a proper one, and I must meet it. The word idea comes from the Greek word meaning to see. In its general use, it means a mental image or a general notion or conception held in the mind. An idea is a symbolic image held in the mind. It is a symbol of something thought or felt. Ideas are not formed by thought alone. Feeling contributes its share to these mental images. To tell the truth, the majority of people scarcely think at all, in the highest sense of the word. Their reasoning and logical faculties are very rudimentary. They accept their ideas at second-hand or second-hundred hand. Their thoughts must be pre-digested for them by others and then handed down to them. And the handed-down idea is the result. The majority of ideas held in the minds of the race arise from feeling and emotion. People may not understand things, but they have experienced feelings or emotions regarding them, and have consequently formed many ideas and ideals therefrom. They do not know just why an idea is held by them. They know only that they feel it that way. And the majority of people are moved, swayed, and act by reasons of induced feelings, rather than by results of reasoning. I am not speaking of intuitional feelings now, but of the plain, everyday, emotional feeling of people. Do you know what a feeling is? The word, used in this sense, means a mental state, emotion, passion, susceptibility, etc. An emotion means an excitement of the feelings. Feelings belong to the instinctive side of our mind rather than to the rational or reasoning side. They spring up from the subconscious strata of the mind in response to the exciting cause coming from without. The instinctive part of our minds are stored with the experiences, feelings, emotions, and mental states of our long line of ancestors, reaching way back to the early beginnings of life. In that part of the mind are sleeping instincts, emotions, and feelings, our inheritance from the past, which await but the inducing cause to call them into activity. The reason or judgment, by means of the will, act as a restrainer, of course, according to the degree of development of the individual. And these outwards agents, if of a physical nature, are suggestions of all kinds. Look around you at the world of men and women, and tell me whether they seem to be moved principally by reason or feeling. Are their actions based upon good judgment and correct and careful reasoning, or are they the result of feeling and emotion? Do people do things because the things are considered right in the light of reason, or do they do them because they feel like it? which produces the greatest motive force? An appeal to the reason of a number of people, or an appeal to their feelings and emotion, which sways a gathering of people, the votes of a people, the actions of the mob, reason or feeling? Which moves even you, good student? Reason or feeling? Answer the question honestly, and you will have the key of suggestive influence.
You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be.